Okay, welcome everyone. Hi, my name is Lynn Hernandez and I'm with the Desmoid Tumor Research Foundation. I'd like to welcome you to the DTRF's Dealing with Desmoids event this evening. This is our 7th session of the Dealing with Desmoids webinar series. These events, this series, aims to bring coping strategies to the desmoid tumor patient community. Tonight's webinar topic is body image and identity. I'd like to introduce you to Ashley Williams now. She is the host of Dealing with Desmoids. Ashley Williams is a licensed clinical social worker and a trauma counselor from South Florida. In 2015, she was diagnosed with a desmoid tumor in her left leg. Since then, she has become passionate about helping patients heal from the trauma of their diagnosis and treatment. Her focus is on those with desmoid tumors, cancer, chronic illness, and other rare diseases. Having undergone multiple rounds of treatment herself, Ashley believes in a holistic mind and body approach to healing. She continues to help individuals from these communities work through their trauma in her counseling practice. Welcome, Ashley. So before we get started, I have a few instructions for our sessions together. If you've joined us before, please forgive me, be patient. We're going to go through these instructions now. So we welcome questions via the Q&A. You'll see the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. So if you have a question for Ashley, please share it there, and she'll try to get to it at the end of her presentation. Also, you'll see that there's a chat function. This is open for your use to communicate with the community, with community members. This chat is going to be unmonitored. So if you post any questions in the chat, we're probably not going to get to them. If you want to share your own experience, we encourage that. If you want to connect with other community members, we encourage that as well. So thanks again for joining us this evening. And now I will hand things over to you, Ashley.
Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate it. It is very nice to be back to do another Dealing with Desmoids session. And if you've joined us for some of the previous sessions, I feel like this is a bit of a culmination of a lot of the other topics that we've talked about. I'm going to be talking about a couple of things that may have been mentioned in other sessions as well, and how it relates to body image and identity. And so this is a topic that really affects all of us, affects everyone who has experienced or been diagnosed with a desmoid tumor, but it affects us all in very, very different ways and in ways that we might not expect. And so I want to talk first about what is body image, what is identity, what are some of the ways that that might be impacted by our desmoid diagnosis, but then also what are some of the repercussions as a result of the fact that we go through challenging things that affect our body image and our identity. So first, I want to start just by defining, what these things are, and they seem pretty simplistic. Body image is what you believe about your appearance, and identity is what you believe about yourself. And in the majority of Western cultures, especially in the United States, we have really separated the concepts of body image and identity. They are two very different things in our mind, which tends to complicate things. And I'll go into why that is in a few moments. But with body image, we tend to have a perspective of ourselves, of how other people view us, the way that we look, our appearance, but also of who we are as an individual. We tend to carry this perspective that our body is like a possession to us. It's just like having a phone or a book or something else that we own. Our body is something that we have. And in the same way that we might talk about our cell phone or talk about something outside of our bodies, we talk about our bodies. For example, I can't tell you how many times I have made the comments of, like, my body's just not working for me today. It's not doing the things that I want it to do. My body's just not functioning correctly. And so I talk about it oftentimes as if it's something separate from myself. And especially when we carry a diagnosis, like a desmoid diagnosis, and our body is afflicted by something that we are currently treating, we're trying to get rid of, we're trying to manage, we tend to think of our bodies in terms of maybe even sometimes this home or this place that we're trapped in, something that we can't get out of. And if we could only get out of this physical body, then I would be free in a sense. And so in the United States, in many Western cultures, we tend to determine our identity separate from our body. So they're two separate things, our body image and our identity. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about why that is, but then we're also going to talk about the importance of bringing those two things together, recognizing that our body is not separate from us, that we are a body, and why that's important, and then how to kind of integrate that into our concept of our body image and our identity, merging those two things. So the first thing are things that we all are probably very aware of, common changes to our body as a result of our diagnosis. We have so many different issues and things that we have to deal with on a regular basis, whether it's a result of our desmoid tumor or a result of the types of treatments that we've had to go through. You see a couple of things on the screen of ways that our body image might be affected, or alterations or things that have changed in our body as a result of either our diagnosis or our treatments. We see things like scars, physical representations or physical things on our body that we can see, hair loss, things that might be a result of the different treatments or surgeries that we've had to go through, like different amputations, maybe permanent or even temporary stomas that are used. And then other symptoms that might fluctuate over time, whether we're on treatment or not on treatment. Things like weight loss and gain, muscle tiredness, fatigue, changes in sexual function, or maybe even infertility, changes in what we would expect or want our body to be able to do that is no longer capable of doing, whether it's because of our diagnosis or because of different treatment options, changes in our skin, changes in swelling around our body, issues with balance. All of these things that are on the screen, they're a small representation of what we go through as desmoid patients. Our tumors can also lead to certain things like deformities or disabilities or changes in what our body was capable of doing before that it's not capable of doing now. Many of you have heard my story before. As Lynn shared, I have a desmoid tumor in my left leg. And so for the past several years have been going through treatment and surgeries for a deformity caused by the tumor that has left me having to relearn how to walk multiple times. And so some of my body changes are not just the physical appearance of the port scar or the scar on my forehead from an allergic reaction during a surgery or things like that, but it's also the changes in how my body's able to function. And so my mobility has been impacted. My range of motion has been impacted. Because of that, my level of activity has been impacted. And so as a desmoid patient, for many of us, we experience not only those like physical, very obvious changes in our body, but also in the way that our body functions. Whenever this happens, it has a little bit of a ripple effect. Now, as I mentioned before, we tend to view ourselves in two separate parts. So we tend to view our bodies separately from who we are as an individual inside. We might refer to that as our spirit or our soul. We tend to view those as two very separate things. But when we talk about these common changes that take place to our body, whether it's the outside physical representation or the changes in our ability to function, it affects both of those things. It affects the way that we view our physical appearance, but it also can affect the way that we view who we are. Now, most of the time, the physical and common body changes that take place as a result of our tumor or our treatment tend to lead to some emotional responses. And we've talked about some of these emotional responses in previous dealing with desmoid sessions, but those emotional responses can come up as a result of the physical body changes that we're experiencing. And so they're very important to note because there's multiple things that influence those kind of emotional changes, but one of them is the way that our body is impacted. Some of the common emotional changes that we see are here on the screen. And like I said, we've talked about many of these in dealing with desmoids sessions previously, but I'd like to highlight just a couple of them to show how changes in our bodies affect the way that we feel. Now, I remember very vividly one time going into work and wearing a top that showed my port whenever I had a port in. I went through a year of intravenous chemo through that port, but my doctor decided to leave the port in for a couple of years afterwards, just in case they would need to use it again or re-access it. So I had a port for about 4 years. And I very vividly remember one of my coworkers coming up to me and telling me that it was inappropriate to show my port because it scares people. And so I need to make sure that I am covering it up, especially because I would work around kids sometimes. And whenever I would be around kids, they wanted to ensure that I didn't scare anybody. So first, if I'm looking at my body in two different ways, my physical appearance, but also my identity or who I am, this comment, this belief or view of me can impact me in both of those realms. First, it might make me feel, which it did, embarrassed that I was showing a port, misunderstood, that people didn't understand maybe what I was going through. It made me feel guilty for not being aware of the fact that, oh, you're right, I think that this could probably scare someone, or maybe I should cover that up. But it also made me feel isolated. It made me feel disconnected from other people. It made me feel sad that that's something that I was going through that people didn't seem to understand. And so the changes to my physical appearance, the body changes that we discussed, affected my view of myself. It also affected the view of how I related to other people. And so felt misunderstood, like I said, or felt lonely. Because other people didn't have an idea or were unable to relate to something that I was going through. And so our body changes not only affect us physically, but they affect us socially as well. Now, I think that we've all gone through, if we've been through treatment or we've been through a diagnosis, we've all probably gone through bouts of anxiety or fatigue, anger, maybe frustration, confusion, being overwhelmed, a bunch of these emotions that are up here, we've all probably experienced throughout our treatment journey. And whenever we feel these different emotions as a result of the changes that have taken place in our body, it also affects the way that we feel about ourselves, so the way that we feel about our identity. I can't tell you how many times I've had thoughts before, like, I'm just never going to go back to the way that I was, or I am not going to be able to do that anymore. With my tumor in my leg, having to give up things like exercise. Exercise was something that was very important to me. The things that are very important to us, we tend to incorporate into our sense of who we are. And so whenever we lose those things as a result of our body changes, that requires a lot of grief and a lot of processing the emotions that we've been through. In our grief session that was done a couple of months ago, we talk a lot about loss and a lot about grief and how that impacts us in this desmoid journey. And when we talk about changes in our body, that comes with a lot of grief. Because with each individual change, we're grieving something, whether it's the loss of the ability to exercise, the loss of our ability to work full-time or achieve, the loss of what we perceive to be our physical appearance or our level of attractiveness. With body changes, with our body image and identity, there tends to be a lot of loss that requires a lot of grief to be able to process and work through many of those changes. However, we are able to process and work through those changes in a way that creates safety within our body. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But one of the things that I'd really like to highlight on the screen here is the feeling of betrayal. Because I think as I've talked to many Desmoid patients about their experience, this feeling of betrayal is the thing that I have felt personally and that comes up most often in my conversations. Is I feel as though my body has betrayed me. I trusted my body to be healthy. I trusted my body to take care of me. I trusted that my body would continue being able to do all of the things that I wanted it and expected it to do. And now I feel as though there's been a betrayal of myself and a betrayal of my body. And so talking about body image and identity, I think one of the most important pieces for us to talk about is that sense of betrayal. Because yes, there are multiple different things that we experience and different changes that we experience in our bodies. And there are ways that we can address those. And we'll talk about some of them in a moment. But I think we really have to get to the core of really looking at those changes, almost feeling like a betrayal that our body has betrayed us. And that's a deep thought. That is a heavy thought, but it is one that I feel is fairly consistent amongst most people who are dealing with something foreign inside of their bodies that they have to either manage or that they're trying to eliminate. And so that's really part of the feeling that we're going to stick with today. Hillary McBride, she has a great book that I'll talk about throughout our time today. But she says emotions influence our sense of self more than thinking does. So in a culture, mostly in Western cultures, we're taught things all the time like mind over matter. We're taught things all the time like just think positive. We're told in so many different instances that the power of positive thinking, right? And there is power in positive thinking, so I don't want to negate that or dismiss that, but I want to supplement that with the notion and with the belief that our feelings, our emotions tend to trump our thinking brain. And so, yes, it is very important for us to incorporate positivity, incorporate gratitude into our life. But we also have to understand that if we're looking for healing in our bodies, if we're looking for healing in regards to our sense of identity and the changes that take place as a result of our tumor and our treatments, that it's important to address the underlying reality that our emotions tend to have more power over us than our thinking does. Again, she says emotions influence our sense of self more than our thinking does. That's because the mental structures that process emotions are located deeper in the brain than the thinking structures. Because emotions are so central to our survival, they are meant to hijack our thinking brain when we are in a situation that threatens our survival. In a society, mainly Western societies, that devalues the body and overvalues rational thought, this can be a disruptive discovery. Now, we started our Dealing with Desmoid sessions talking about trauma and how does trauma affect us and how do the different systems in the body override whenever we experience a trauma. That fight or flight response kicks in. And that's exactly what she's talking about here. We can have positive thinking. We can have different mental strategies that we use whenever trying to overcome challenges. But when our body kicks into that fight or flight mode, different parts of our brain shut down. The rational thought part of our brain completely shuts down because our body is wired to believe that that part of our brain is not needed when we're in a survival situation. If you imagine a survival situation as being like, I'm being chased by a lion down the street, at that point, I don't need the part of my brain that is strategizing or that is thinking. I need that part of the brain to shut down, and I need the mechanisms for my body to come online that will either help me fight this lion or run away from this lion. Now, when we're diagnosed with a desmoid tumor, when we are going through different types of treatment options, when we're preparing for a scan to see the stability or how our tumor is doing, Our body doesn't know any different. The tumor versus the lion, right? It interprets both of those as threats. And so our body naturally kicks into that gear of fight or flight. And so other parts of our brain might shut down. Parts of our brain associated with speech sometimes shut down. Parts of our brain associated with memory sometimes shut down. But that part of our brain for rational thinking also can shut down in order to prepare us to fight or to run away. And so those emotions that come up, the fear, the anxiety, the overwhelm, those emotions are what kick in over our thinking. And so when we talk about healing, again, yes, it's important for us to think about cognitive strategies like positive thinking and journaling. I'm a big fan of if you've been here, so I'll talk about journaling later. But it is doubly as important for us to talk about strategies that utilize our body in a way where we can diffuse some of the tension of the threats that we're experiencing. Now, again, how does this relate to body image and identity? Well, when it comes to a desmoid tumor, we're talking today specifically about body changes that might be a result of your tumor or your treatment options. We all have a body image outside of our desmoid tumor too, but it's deeply impacted by our experience. And so that's what we're kind of talking about today. But we're talking about it in a sense where if we feel as though our bodies have betrayed us and we're constantly have a threat in front of us, how do we calm our nervous systems down, which we've talked about in previous sessions? But then how do we also develop a trust with our body because there's been a betrayal? So when there's a betrayal that happens, then we have to build back trust. And so when it comes to our bodies, it's the same thing. There's a betrayal that happens and we have to fight to build back trust with our bodies. And what does that look like? We can approach that from a cognitive standpoint, but we also really need to approach it from a physical standpoint and emotional standpoint as well. Dr. Neva Perron says disembodiment, which is what we're going to be talking about a little bit more for the rest of the session, or disrupted embodiment, is an experience of disconnection from our body. Now, if you've been through the trauma session, you know that there's something that happens whenever we are presented with a threat. Our bodies tend to become overwhelmed, and there's a nerve that connects our brain to our body that tends to like short circuit and disconnect from each other. That is a way of our body learning to cope with the trauma that we're going through. It's called the vagus nerve. We've talked about it before. But when that vagus nerve disconnects, it can cause a whole host of consequences that happen as a result. And one of them is something called disembodiment. So disembodiment is essentially whenever we view ourselves in that dual perspective. We view ourselves as a person who has a body. We own a body that is separate from us, but in reality, we are our bodies. And so we're really trying to look at an integrated approach of incorporating who we are, our identity, with our body image, our bodies, and understanding that both of those are who we are, versus looking at it from two separate things. And when we look at our body as something separate from us, that's what we refer to as disembodiment. And that again can cause a whole host of emotional challenges that go along with the physical challenges that we're already experiencing. So it's the reason that I bring it up in this session today, because I think it's so important to talk about embodiment and how do we become embodied as a way to really address the physical challenges that we go through and the body changes that we go through in order to kind of integrate those two different perspectives. I am my body, and I need to learn to be accepting of my body and to create my body as kind of a safe place for me to be. I'm going to put it in terms of a house. And so we'll talk about it as this example, right? So imagine that I move into a new house and I notice that when I look out the front door, when I look out the front window, I see people just hanging out on their lawns all day. Now I go outside to see what all the commotion is about, and I notice that people are very particular about the way that they adorn the outside of their houses. Many people have nice shutters, nice lawns, flower beds, certain color schemes, all sorts of decorations, and they seem to be outside all of the time, managing the outside of their house. So naturally, if this is what my neighborhood does, I'm going to go outside as well, and I'm going to start really paying attention to the front of my house. At first, it might look fairly plain, but I'm going to focus my attention on how do I bring my house to the same standard or to the same level as the rest of the neighborhood. What flowers do I plant? What trees do I put in? What color do I paint it? How do I adorn the house in order to make it up to the standards that we have in this neighborhood? And I noticed that after a while, I spend all of my time outside in the front lawn, and I barely enjoy any time that I have inside of the house. Now, this is essentially what we do with our bodies. Our body image and our identity has become fairly synonymous with our physical appearance, with what does the outside of our bodies look like. We focus so much on, not everybody, but a lot of the time, we focus so much on how do I look? How am I perceived? How do other people view me? And I tend to look to other people's lawns or look to other people's lives to help determine how I should handle mine. Now, we do this in our lives as well. I'll be honest with you. I've looked at other people multiple times, whether it's on social media, whether it's just friends that I have. And I've looked at their lives and I've often made comparisons. I have a desmoid tumor. They don't. They can run a marathon. I can't. They can do this. I can't, and so on and so forth. And we tend to kind of look at the outside of what people present to us in order to determine where we fit in. But if we look at the picture of a house, right, what is the most important thing about our house or about our space? I would say that the most important thing about our house is that for most of us, our house tends to be our safe space, our sanctuary. That might not be the case all the time, depending on different factors. But when we look at a home versus a house, right, when we look at what makes up a home, it tends to be the place where we feel safe, where we feel comfortable, where we hold it sacred. We view it as a sanctuary to be able to retreat from the things that are going on in the outside world. Now, our bodies are essentially the same thing for us, but so often that we don't necessarily treat it that way. Our bodies are our home, and we often view it again as being completely separate from ourselves, something that we own that's outside of us. But our bodies are the place that we live our life. It's our home, and it's something that should be our safe space, our sanctuary, the place where we're comfortable, the place where we're accepted, the place where we can retreat from the stresses of the outside world. But that's complicated so many times whenever your house or whenever your body is afflicted by some sort of diagnosis, some sort of illness, pain, some sort of ailment, right? It becomes difficult for us to view our bodies as this is a safe place. This is a sanctuary for me to be able to retreat. And so as a result of those things, we tend to disconnect ourselves from our bodies and create that disembodiment where I don't want to be feeling what's going on in my body. It's constantly in pain. Maybe I'm constantly nauseous. Maybe I don't like the way that it looks. Maybe I'm disgusted by certain aspects of my body. Maybe every time I look in the mirror, I see things that weren't there before. I don't look like myself and I get sad or I get hurt or I get disappointed. And so we often create strategies by completely disconnecting from our body to try to eliminate or alleviate some of the sensations or the pain or the discomfort that we're feeling in our bodies. And I know that I'm going to put this in a way today that sounds very simplistic. And it's not very simplistic. It's a practice that needs to be put into place in order to be able to come back to our bodies in a sense, to find it as a place that is safe and comfortable for us. Especially for us, it's doubly as hard or doubly as more of an investment maybe than for some others, because we're really fighting against the fact that we feel as though our bodies have betrayed us. And so it really takes a lot of intentionality to develop that relationship and develop that trust with our body again, especially because for many of us, the absence of a desmoid is not always realistic, right? And so my desmoid is still in my leg, it's still there. I'm still dealing with mobility issues. I'm still dealing with range of motion issues. I still deal with pain sometimes. And so how do I learn to come back to my body and become embodied in a sense, even when those things are going on? And so I'm going to discuss a couple of strategies for how we can do that. And again, I know that initially they might sound very, very simplistic, but I encourage you to try them. And I encourage you to try to incorporate them, because when it comes to body image and when it comes to identity, it's very important for us to pursue what we call embodiment, or redeveloping that trust with our body. And these are some of the things that it could look like. Again, Hillary McBride tells us, you are your body. And I think that that's a very important piece for us to take with us, that we are not separate from our body, but that we are our body. So here are a couple of different strategies that we can try to become embodied, to help develop and rebuild that trust with our bodies whenever we feel as though it's betrayed us, whether it's because of our desmoid tumor or because of how we handle treatment or because of something else. But some of these strategies I've talked about in previous sessions, and they cross over in multiple different ways with some of the other things that we've discussed. But especially in this sense, I think these are very important to incorporate, to buy into, even though they seem like they might be a little too simplistic for the reality of what we experience in our bodies on a daily basis. We're going to talk about things in kind of 3 different realms. And so the first is going to be mental and emotional. How do we develop trust from a mental and emotional standpoint? How do we develop trust from a physical standpoint? And then how do we develop trust from a social standpoint? Because our identities cross over not only personally, but interpersonally. So talking about the social aspect is also really important when it comes to developing trust with our bodies again. The first thing is being aware of our internal self-talk and context. Now, we tend to be so hard on ourselves. We tend to be harsh. We tend to talk about our bodies with disgust many times, especially if our bodies have changed in some way as a result of the things that we have gone through. When we talk about context in here, so being aware of context, essentially what that means is we tend to be harsh on ourselves in comparison to some sort of standard that is outside of us. So for example, we all know that, especially in Western culture, there are many beauty standards that are out there today. You're supposed to have a certain body type, you're supposed to have a certain type of complexion, you're supposed to have a certain type of hairstyle or whatever, there's all sorts of things that we strive to be in regards to our fitness, in regards to our appearance. Now, when I look in the mirror, I'll tell you, a couple of years ago, I did cryoablation, and when they intubated me, they taped the intubation tube to my face, and I had a major allergic reaction to the tape that they used. And so on my forehead, I have a scar from the tape that they used and the wound that resulted as a result of that tape. Every single time I look in the mirror, the only thing that I see is this deep scar across my forehead. If you were to ask people in my life, they'd be like, Ashley, what are you talking about? But it's literally the only thing I see. And I think we all probably have things like that, where as a result of the things we've been through, we see the scars, we see the deformities, we see the swelling, we see the weight gain, we see the weight loss, we see the thinning hair, whatever it is, we see that, and our initial reaction is just, ugh, that's not the way that I want it to be. That's not the way that it's supposed to look. That's not the way that it looked before. And every time I look in the mirror and I see this scar across my forehead, I will roll my eyes maybe. I'll turn away because I don't want to look at my reflection anymore. I might experience disgust. I might experience something along those lines. Now, when we talk about context, context is really referring to who set the standard for what I'm comparing myself to whenever I look in the mirror. Now, the standard is set by people outside of me, set by the beauty industry, set by marketers, set by people who are trying to sell their products, set by social media, set by other people who are trying to show off their appearance. All sorts of different things might create my standard of the way that I'm supposed to look. And when I have a scar that shows that it's not supposed to be that way, I tend to be harsh towards myself and internalize that as a reflection of who I am, right? Or the way that I might be perceived by others, whether it's attractiveness, whether it's if I take care of myself or not, all sorts of different ideas that we might have of ourselves as a result. So when we talk about being aware of context, I think it's important to challenge context. And that means challenging the societal standard that creates the disgust that's coming up in me. So rather than being harsh towards myself because I have a scar that I can't do anything about, maybe redirecting and reframing some of that harshness or some of that disgust towards the standard that has been created. Because in reality, I am a firm believer of this. I believe this about other scars that I have, just not the one across my forehead, that scars are a beautiful story that shows where you've been and the things that you have overcome. And so I think that scars are absolutely beautiful. When I see them on other people, I truly think that they're absolutely beautiful. But for some reason, this one on my forehead just really gets to me. And so what can I do to reframe that perspective of this is not something to be disgusted by, but rather the standard that has been set societally or from those who are trying to sell products or whatever the case may be? How can I reframe and redirect some of those emotions to a different context? Now, again, from an emotional standpoint, we might not want to live in a place where we're angry or where we're projecting anger onto different entities rather than on ourselves, but it's a good place to start, to redirect our focus away from ourselves and the things that we might be harsh on about ourselves and redirecting it somewhere else. Now, especially in our anxiety session, we talked quite a bit about being aware of internal self-talk. We tend to be our own worst critics. We tend to be so harsh on ourselves. And it is almost a universal reaction when I tell people to be kind to themselves, an eye roll or some sort of gesture that's like, okay, that is a nice platitude. That sounds nice, but that's difficult to do. But I think especially when we're learning to develop trust with our bodies and be able to come to a place where we feel embodied, being kind to ourselves is a really key practice. It's really important to give ourselves a break. It's really important to bring our thoughts and our awareness to reality of the fact that we're dealing with something very hard. We're going through a very hard treatment. We're doing something that's very, very challenging. And what our body is doing is actually fighting on our behalf. Our body, in many senses, is not betraying us, but is actually fighting for us. It's fighting against that foreign entity, fighting against that tumor, and working with whatever treatments that we might be going through at the time. And so that reframing of our internal self-talk or of the context that we have, I think is a really important place to start when rebuilding trust with our bodies. The second, and you've heard me say this before, is naming our emotions. If our emotions have so much of an influence on the way that we view ourselves and the way that we view how we fit into the world, then understanding what emotions we're actually feeling, being able to name them, and understanding how we can either work with them or challenge them is of key importance. And so many of us, if you ask, how are you feeling today? Most people will say sad, mad, or happy, right? Sad, mad, glad. Those are the three emotions that we tend to express. But being able to identify our emotions and name them with a little bit more poignancy is very important for our healing, and especially for being able to trust our bodies again. Learning what is this thing that's coming up in my body and knowing how to pinpoint it, knowing how to name it, and understanding what is going on inside of us is hugely important. The third one, self-care, we've had a whole session on self-care, so I won't talk about it too much. But when we talk about relearning and developing trust with our bodies from a physical standpoint, it's important for us to take care of ourselves. I hear it so often when it comes to being diagnosed or going through treatment, especially when we have that feelings that our body's betraying us. Our natural reaction tends to be going into a mode where we deny our bodies. Like our body's requiring so much of us right now that I have to like push down all of the discomfort. I have to push down all of the pain. I have to push down all of the fatigue because I don't want to be more of a burden to myself or to anybody else. So I'm going to push down all of those things that my body are telling me, and I'm going to just push through and do the things that have to get done. I'm not going to listen to what my body is telling me that it needs right now. In self-care, especially if you're going through treatment, rest, nutrition, exercise, just walking if you can, walking a little bit around the block, walking to get a glass of water sometimes is all that we can do, but being active as much as we can, hydrating, nutrition, rest, all of those things are going to be extremely important in taking care of that, facilitating that trust with our bodies again. I always tell people, if you look at this might sound counterintuitive because I'm talking about like integrating our sense of self, but I tell people if we look at our bodies, if we look at ourselves as if we're somebody else, as if I'm my best friend, how would I treat my best friend if they were going through the same thing? If my best friend was going through a desmoid diagnosis and the chemos and the radiation and all of the things that I've been through, I would be so compassionate. I would want to take care of them. I would want them to know that they're loved, that they're valuable, that they're not a burden, all of these different things that we don't give to ourselves. And so sometimes we might have to take the perspective of looking at ourselves as if we're somebody else, because how would we treat somebody else in this instance? We would treat somebody else probably very different than we're treating ourselves right now. And that's essentially like one of my biggest pieces of encouragement when it comes to self-care is looking at ourselves through that eye of compassion, giving our bodies what we need, being kind to our bodies, being understanding that our bodies are going through a lot. The fourth thing, so important, movement. Our bodies and our brains are so interconnected. And the whole point of our brain and body connection is for our bodies to move. And so movement is such a healing practice that is so necessary in rebuilding trust between our bodies and ourselves, integrating that sense of our bodies with ourselves. Now, movement, we tend to think of it in terms of exercise only. And in especially Western cultures, exercise tends to be something that we look at from a perspective of like, I'm going to beat my body into submission. And so I'm going to get it to look the way that I want it to, or be the way that I want it to. But movement has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with how we alter our physical appearance. Movement might be dancing to music in your house. Movement might be doing chair yoga, sitting in your chair and doing different stretches or different practices, even if you're not able to physically move or walk or get around very easily. Movement of any kind is going to be very, very important. We've talked about a strategy before in previous sessions called Eshi, where the movement practices are essentially just tensing up your muscles and relaxing your muscles, tensing up your muscles, relaxing them, and then shaking it out. Even a simple practice like that integrates the connection between the brain and the body, gets the body to do something that is intended to do with that connection between the two. And so any type of movement and moving is going to be probably the most important thing on this list, even if it seems like it's minor or simple. The next thing, new sensory experiences and interoception. Again, we've talked about this in previous sessions before, but this with movement creates such a foundation for developing trust in our bodies again. It is relearning our bodies in the way that it operates. Interoception is essentially Do I have an awareness of what is going on inside of my body? Do I have an awareness of those emotions that are coming up? Am I able to name them? Do I have an awareness of things like I'm hungry right now, or I'm thirsty right now, or I could take a nap right now? Do I know what my body is trying to tell me? And so in many of our previous sessions, we have things like vagus nerve exercises, exercises to help calm the nervous system, exercises like progressive muscle relaxation, things like singing or dancing or humming, or things that feel very, very simple, but they're practices that we can use to engage our body in a way that creates a self-awareness of what is going on inside of my body. When I have new sensory experiences, I use essential oils, or I am feeling a different texture, or I'm trying a different food and it has a different taste. New sensory experiences do the same thing. It creates connection between our brains and our bodies in a different way that allows us to develop more of an awareness of what's going on inside of our bodies. Taking care of your body fits in with self-care of nutrition, hydration, sleep, really treating yourself the way that you would treat someone else. And then the final pieces are the social aspect. So how do I educate my support system and how do I seek support? Because in so many cases, we tend to isolate ourselves. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard it from my Desmoid clients, from Desmoid patients that I've just had the opportunity to interact with, of I am a burden. This diagnosis can be very overwhelming. People don't want to get involved in this. Like, it's too much for people. It's too much for me. So it's too much to invite other people into. But it is so important for us to be very, very intentional about maintaining strong social connections. And whether that is educating people on what our experience is truly like, whether that's educating people on maybe some of these other categories of what are some things that I need to do to move, or here's the different emotions that I'm feeling, maybe some support that I need from people to help get me to a doctor's appointment or help get me groceries or something along those lines. But the way that we relate interpersonally is also very significant in being able to help heal that sense of embodiment of feeling connected to ourselves and developing trust with our bodies. We are made for connection with other people. And so it is denying ourselves and our bodies the ability to connect whenever we isolate or whenever we have those negative internal dialogues that tell us that we're too much. And so maintaining and facilitating that connection is of primary importance. So all of these things relate to body image and identity in a deep sense, even though they, again, like I said, they might feel simplistic. Hillary McBride says, with any long-term relationship characterized by trust, deep connection, and mutual support, developing our ability to trust ourselves as a body does not happen overnight. There are misunderstandings, adventures, discoveries, and the bliss of finding a rhythm. It requires a million little choices and tiny experiments to help us know we are in good hands with ourselves. And essentially what she's telling us here from her research that she's done is that when we've gone through something like a diagnosis, like different treatment options, it has affected and changed our body in many ways, and it's affected and changed our view of ourselves in a way that causes us to feel very disconnected from our body. It takes time, it takes intentionality, it takes effort, and it takes a level of understanding to be able to redevelop that trust with our bodies, especially in our cases, knowing that many times our desmoid tumor will continue to reside in our bodies. It's not necessarily something that we all are able to eliminate or get rid of, or at least like even mentally eliminate, as we'll go through multiple different checkups and scans throughout our lives. But she's talking about the intentionality and the practice that it takes in order to develop that trust with ourselves, to develop a body and a sense of ourselves that feels safe, that feels like home, that we feel safe in, that we feel like we're able to retreat from the stresses of the outside world back to ourselves. And so many of the things that we've talked about in dealing with Desmoid sessions in general have been about our nervous system, how to calm our nervous system, how to cope when we've been through something traumatic, different strategies that we can use whenever anxiety and depression and all of these different feelings come up. Ultimately, all of these things that we've talked about in the past result in that disconnection from ourselves, that disconnection from our bodies. And so healing really looks like being able to reintegrate those two concepts, who I am with the body that I have, knowing again that I am a body, and that even though there are challenging things going on in my body might feel like it's under constant attack all of the time. I really have to fight to keep an integrated sense of who I am, and that includes the body that I have. And how do I make it as safe of a place as possible, whether it's through the way that I speak to myself, the way that I take care of myself, the way that I hydrate, the way that I provide nutrition, the way that I move it. Again, movement is such an important part of being able to heal that disconnection that takes place. And how can I bring other people into the process to really support me in that, to understand what I'm doing with that, and to feed that sense of connection that I really have. So that's it for tonight. When we talk about body image and identity, we're really talking about the core and the crux of it is, how do I reconnect to myself after things that have caused me to feel disconnected from my body?
Okay. Can you see me?
Yes.
Where am I? You see me?
I see you.
Sorry about that. Here I am. Okay. That was wonderful, Ashley. Thank you. You know, every time you host one of these, I think to myself, oh, I know what she's going to talk about. I like, you know, it's pretty much everything that I've ever heard. No, it's rarely what I've ever heard. Okay, so it looks like we do have a couple of questions. Are there any other things besides what you mentioned that can lead to disembodiment?
There's a lot of things that can lead to disembodiment, especially in Western cultures. And so in these sessions, we've talked about a lot of them. So trauma is one of those things. Again, we even talked a little bit tonight about the actual physiology that takes place whenever we experience a trauma, that actual disconnection of the vagus nerve that takes place. But if we look at things culturally, we really do live in a society that promotes specific beauty standards. And if our body is not up to par, if our appearance is not up to par, then it's something that you need to change. It's something that you need to get in line or in shape. And so there's often a disconnection fueled by that, just that we have so many unrealistic beauty standards, and in many cases, so many conflicting beauty standards. So there's not just one that we're trying to achieve. Different people have different ideas of what that looks like. But there may be things as well, like different messages, whether it's from different spiritual practices or maybe different experiences that we've been through before, that tell us that our bodies are bad. There are many cases where we've learned that our bodies are bad, and we might even internalize that sense after feeling betrayed by our body by something like a diagnosis. And so if we have that sense, it also creates that disconnection. One of the biggest ones I would say is chronic pain. And I think that that's probably common for many people who have a desmoid diagnosis. At some point in their journey, if it's not constant, some sort of chronic pain. And when we're in pain, we tend to do whatever we can to completely disconnect ourselves from our bodies. And so there's so many different factors that can lead to that disembodiment. And so we're not only fighting our diagnosis, we're fighting cultural expectations, we're fighting maybe internalized beliefs that we have about our bodies. And so there's a lot of different things that can fuel that, as well as our diagnosis.
Okay, thank you for that. another one we have. Do you have any resources you can share that will teach me more about this topic?
100%. I've shared quite a few in previous sessions. Some of these will be the same, but there is a book by Brene Brown called Atlas of the Heart. I have it here because I use it every day in my practice. This is essentially like an encyclopedia of emotions. It's a very simple read. Each emotion probably takes up 2 pages, and so you could pick one for the day and read through it. But it is just a wonderful description of the different emotions that we experience. So if we're talking about healing and we're talking about building trust and knowing our bodies, and knowing the emotions that we're feeling, this book is, I use it for myself. I use it every day in my practice to help guide people towards what is the emotion that they're really feeling and making sense of their emotions. And then many of the quotes today were pulled from Hillary McBride. She's a PhD that has studied body image and body and identity as well. She has a book called The Wisdom of Your Body, and it talks about all of the different ways that we might become disembodied and different strategies for rebuilding that trust with our body. I tell most of my clients that I work with, especially those who have some sort of diagnosis or going through some sort of treatment, this is the #1 book that I tend to recommend, The Wisdom of Your Body by Hillary McBride. It's very, very good, and it really speaks deeply into this topic.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm making a note of that myself. So Ashley, are there any other kind of closing remarks you want to make before we end the evening?
I just love Desmoid patients so much. Obviously, I am one. I think that there is so much that we have to navigate, and especially with a Desmoid, it is more about falling in love with the process than it is about trying to get to a destination. I think these are things that we deal with constantly and on a regular basis. And so I think oftentimes whenever we think about something like, I want to have higher self-esteem, or I want to have a better body image, or I want to become embodied, or whatever our goal is, we tend to view it from the perspective of like, I have a goal to achieve and I have to get to the outcome. And I think one of the approaches that I would encourage the most is, rather than focusing so much on getting to an outcome, focusing on really falling in love with the process to the outcome, because the outcome is something that is possibly like a very long road ahead. The outcome is possibly something that's lifelong learning we'll be doing for the rest of our lives. And so rather than setting that goal, goals obviously are important, but rather than setting an outcome, really falling in love with the process to get to that outcome, I think, especially with these topics, is one of the biggest encouragements I could give.
I really love that. So we actually just had a couple more questions come through. Do you mind if I shoot them over to you?
Of course.
Okay. So someone's asking, what are your mental hacks to help you love your body in spite of the pain, disfigurement, etc.?
I would say for myself, even just from a personal perspective, I'm going to go personal perspective on this one instead of a clinical perspective. But I think that changing the context piece is very, very important. We tend to view ourselves as a member of like everyone around us that we're comparing ourselves to, and where do I measure up to societal standards? Our experience is just so different. We are going through different things and having to navigate things that not everybody is going through. And so we're very much on a different playing field, if you want to put it in that terminology. We can't look at other people necessarily to determine or to tell us where we fit in, or where our value is, or where we should find our identity. And I think one of the most important things is really looking at it from the standpoint of, look at all of the things that I've had to endure, and look at all of the things that have had to be overcome, and reframing it from a perspective of, even though there might be an impact, like I think the question mentioned specifically disability or disfigurement. I've gone through that. I've had disabilities, very, very obvious limp, very obvious disfigurement, but knowing that I'm on a different playing field, I can't compare myself to other people. And as a result of my journey and as a result of the game that I'm playing over here, which is different than what these people might be playing over here, I'm doing really good. And here are all of the things that I can be proud of. Here are all of the ways that, yes, I may feel that my body's betrayed me in some senses, but here's all of the ways that my body has fought for me too. My body has endured those chemos. My body has endured those radiations, those different treatments. It is healed. And even though it might not always have the response that I would want it to in regards to the tumor, my body's constantly fighting for me. And so looking at it from that perspective versus what do other people have that I don't, but what have I gained that other people haven't had the opportunity to gain? And that's not to turn like toxic positivity or not to minimize the things that we go through, but really this journey is one that requires a lot of strength and a lot of mental fortitude and a lot of resilience, and really being able to focus on those pieces that have been developed is the thing I think that really helps me. So even putting that into a practical standpoint, when I look at this scar in the mirror and I like roll my eyes at it, I have to constantly remind myself, like, what is this a representation of? It's a representation of hard fought battles, really difficult challenges that I had to go through, and I got through them, you know? And so it's a representation of something beautiful, even though if I compare it to societal standards, I might roll my eyes.
Okay, I hear that. Okay, we have one other question. As someone who is about to start treatment for my abdominal desmoid tumor, this has been very helpful to take in before beginning the long journey. Is there any advice you would give from your own personal journey that you wish someone told you before starting, related to body image or anything else?
Ooh, I am thinking of you as you go into treatment. I know that that's an overwhelming place to be. My biggest encouragement would be, like, you will get through the treatment that you're going through. There might be changes. There might be some physical changes in the way that you feel, the way that you look. There might be some different, we don't know what those changes will be, but there might be some changes in whether it's your appearance or the way that you feel. Many times those things are temporary. And so as you come out of treatment, knowing that those things are temporary and that you will come on the other side of it. In some cases, if they're not temporary, then you will learn to live with it too. And so there's just so much encouragement in not necessarily seeing the thing that you're going through right now or the certain change that you have as necessarily being something that is, I can't think of the term that I'm looking for, but it's something that you will overcome. And there are people around, there are people, whether it's through the DTRF, if it's through the Desmoidian, there are other people who have been through what you're going through. And again, that speaks to that support side as well. I think that support is so important as you walk through a treatment, of being able to hear from other people what works for them, what didn't work for them, and really being able to filter that and take what works for you in your experience. But my biggest encouragement would also be support, leaning on other people and calling on other people who can relate to your experience, who have been through some of the things that you've been through. Because sometimes it's difficult whenever we're talking to people who don't have that same experience, right? And so in that case, I would really just encourage you to call on your fellow Desmoidians to walk alongside you in that process. They're the ones who have gotten me through all of my treatments. So it's a big blessing to be able to have this and to be able to have the opportunity to connect with other people who can walk with you through that.
Okay, thank you so much, Ashley. So I appreciate your answering those questions and those kind of final reflections that you provided. So thank you, as I mentioned, to you, and also thank you to the Desmoid patient and caregiver community for joining us this evening. Please note that, as usual, we will be sharing a recording of this webinar after it's edited. Usually it takes about 2 weeks, and all Dealing with Desmoids content can be found on our website at dtrf.org/dealing with Desmoids, all one word, no spaces. Go to dtrf.org to subscribe to our mailing list so that you'll receive notification when the recording goes public. And I would just one more announcement. Please be sure to join us for the DTRF's Together We Will weekend, which is taking place from September 22nd to the 24th in Philadelphia. You can learn more at our website, dtrf.org. So that's pretty much it. I hope everybody has a wonderful night. And Ashley, thank you so much again for sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom. And we hope to connect with everyone soon.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, Ashley. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Have a great night.